Welcome to our Death Rituals series, a series dedicated to exploring how cultures around the world honor death, grief, and remembrance. From the vibrant altars of Dia de los Muertos to the quiet precision of traditional embalming, from indigenous mourning ceremonies to the inked memorials of modern tattooists. Each episode uncovers how humans give meaning to loss through ritual, through intimate conversations with those who tend to death, museum curators, artists, cultural leaders, and funeral professionals. We look at how ceremony, creativity, and community transform grief into connection. It's about the universal ways we celebrate, remember, and carry forward the lives of those who came before us. Revealing how we face death says everything about how we choose to live. Our guest today is Blake Hutchings. Blake is a Humanist Celebrant accredited by Humanists UK. He creates non-religious ceremonies for weddings, funerals, and naming days, working closely with individuals and families to ensure each ceremony reflects their values, stories, and relationships. Blake has over 20 years of experience in public speaking, performance, and creative writing, skills he brings directly into a celebrant practice. His approach is rooted in careful listening and clear communication, with a focus on making ceremonies personal without being prescriptive or religious. A humanist in practice long before formally identifying as one, Blake now works with the Humanist UK framework to support people through major life moments, from welcoming a child to saying goodbye to a loved one. Outside of his celebrant work, he is a musician, an active participant in amateur theater, a writer, and a father of two. Enjoy.
Blake Hutchings, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm delighted to talk with you about your work as a celebrant and Humanist UK as well.
I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you for getting in contact.
Well, I always like to start hearing a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you were.
Okay, so I was born and raised in a city called Coventry in the English Midlands. It's a sort of medium-sized town, city, about 350,000 people, that kind of size. It's quite a diverse city with a lot of different people of various backgrounds, religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. Quite busy, lovely place. I grew up in a home with my parents and my sister, who's 2 years older than me. It was a happy, comfortable working class home, just a nice, happy family background. And yeah, just went to a local state school and grew up happy with a fun upbringing.
Was there anything that you, either by yourself or with your sibling, were into?
My sister was, at the time when we were younger, she was very much into horses and horse riding, so she would do a lot of, she had those lessons. I did a little bit of that myself, but it wasn't really such a big thing for me. The thing that took off for me, my sort of passion that I got into, was music, and you can see the guitar hanging on the wall behind me. I became a guitarist. I first picked up a guitar at 7 years old, and it's never left me. As I went through school, I started to join school-based bands, which then, as I got into my late teens and early adulthood, started to go out and play at venues, and I was a singer and guitarist, and yeah, I've been playing guitar and singing ever since.
That's amazing. That's why I love asking this question. You just learn things about people that you wouldn't know otherwise. And how did you become a humanist celebrant? And maybe just start by explaining what that means.
If people aren't familiar with the term celebrant, what you might think of is, you may think of an officiant, maybe. If you think of a wedding ceremony or a funeral ceremony or a naming ceremony, you would have somebody who is sort of leading proceedings. In a religious ceremony, that might typically be a vicar or a priest if it's a Christian ceremony. If it's a non-religious ceremony, such as a humanist one, then it's me, essentially. I'm the person that stands at the front and would introduce I guess there's sort of a master of ceremonies element to it. You're sort of talking about what the ceremony is going to involve, be reading tributes, reading poetry, prose, contributions from family, and also introducing people, bringing people up to speak as well. So that's the first sort of covering off what a celebrant is. The other word, as you mentioned, humanist celebrant, defines what type of celebrant I am, and essentially a humanist is a person who doesn't have any religious faith, but has a shared ethical, moral outlook with a wider community of people who identify as celebrants. So, yeah, it's essentially non-religious but shared moral values and things like that. In terms of how I got into it, about 15 years ago, or thereabouts, I attended 2 funerals. One of them was for my uncle, who had a humanist ceremony, and another one was for mother of a friend who had a Catholic ceremony. And attending those 2 ceremonies in close time to each other, just a few weeks apart, I was able to see quite a stark difference in how they were put together, what their focus was, how they were delivered, and how I felt that it resonated with me and felt comfortable and right for me. A few years later, when I was looking at changing my job, the person who delivered my uncle's ceremony had recommended to me that this might be something that I would be good at. He'd seen me do public speaking before. He knew of my interests and my beliefs and thought that I might be a good fit for it. So I took the training course with Humanists UK, and I've been doing it ever since. That's been 10 years now, and since then I've also joined the training team, so I now train new celebrants to do this work too.
So tell us a little bit more about what was different in the 2 funeral ceremonies that really got you thinking about this. And I should say, in all of our discussions, everybody can have their own beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, so for some people, a Catholic ceremony is going to be perfect. Okay. And for some, it will not. And this is really, I think people know more about the Catholic ceremonies than the humanist ceremonies. And it's just useful for people to hear that there are other options and to learn in depth about them. So I just want to say that at the outset. But for you personally, tell us a little bit about the difference that you observed and probably just felt at these 2 different ceremonies.
I think probably the key difference was, well, I suppose two key differences that are related. The first was the focus of the content and what it was all about. It very much felt like with the humanist ceremony that I went to, all of the content was about the person that had died. It was a real tribute to my uncle, with also a little bit of talk about how it affects the feelings of the people that are left behind. Although we are not religious, we're not anti-religious. There's nothing that gets said in any of these ceremonies that makes an outright statement of the existence of a god or of an afterlife or anything like that. It's just simply, I guess, quite secular, I suppose, in that sense, that it just talks in a very sort of universal way about how we as people may be feeling about losing somebody without necessarily making any statement of what happens after life or anything like that. I felt a little when I've attended religious ceremonies, that when there is talk about the religious side of things, because the statements that are made are often made as in sort of a matter-of-fact way, if you don't share that view, then it can be quite jarring, because you may be thinking, I just happened to have mentioned that it was a Catholic ceremony that I attended before, but not to single out Catholic ceremonies at all, but just religious ceremonies in general. If there is a statement that's made that you don't feel sits right with you, then it can affect the feeling and the receptiveness of you for the rest of the ceremony, which is why I suppose in humanist ceremonies we really try not to make any declarations or statements about things like that. We just focus on the human.
And perhaps it's also the case that in a religious ceremony, they tend to follow a specific script, so to speak. So there are certain prayers that are said, there are certain songs that are sung, there's a certain order of things, which many people do find a lot of comfort in. But if it is not your religion, or you don't feel a connection to it, and you're coming to honor and celebrate somebody who's died, then that might make it more difficult for you, and it might in some sense be more focused on the process than the person, whereas the humanist ceremony is focused entirely on the person who died.
Yes, I would say that certainly the last point that you made there, that the humanist ceremony is almost entirely on the person that's died, but I guess also on the people that are left behind as well, is an also part of the focus there, and the human connections that we've made through them. I don't really know too much about how religious ceremonies are structured and whether they do follow scripts. And I am aware that some do, but I certainly couldn't say that's universal across the board for religious ceremonies. I'm sure that there are some that are very open to making them much more personal, and I think that's a good thing. I think that my personal taste says that I like to see them focused on the person.
So tell us a little bit about the training that you undertook to become a humanist celebrant and that now you're involved in to help new people become celebrants. What does that entail?
So it's a 3-stage training course where the first day is we meet together with the training cohort online and discuss. The first day is really sort of, I guess, for everybody to sort of check that this is right for you. It gives you an overview of what the job involves. It gives you an opportunity to discuss with others your understanding of humanism and make sure that you feel that you are comfortable identifying as such, and talks a little bit about some of the key skills that are involved in the job. And then in the second stage, it's a weekend where everybody gets together in person, and we start to explore things like how you might deal with a grieving family if you're going to visit them, to have a conversation with them about the person that's died so that you can start pulling together content for a tribute. We have writing exercises where we see the kind of tributes that people can put together, giving lots of feedback and development on that. It's a really useful experience to be able to observe how other people are doing things as well, so that you can pick up ideas. It's a very collaborative, very supportive environment that people go into in these. It's also, of course, an opportunity to practice public speaking, so we give training on that to make sure that people are comfortable with it, that they know some of the techniques that are going to support a delivery for a ceremony. And then in the final part of the training, which is another weekend where everybody gets together, there are some more of those key skill developments, but also we would then deliver a mock funeral ceremony. So they would be given a case study, they would write the ceremony, and we'd go to a local crematorium and deliver the ceremony in as real a setting as possible. And again, feedback comes from that. People are in between stages, they're writing assignments. These are sort of case study funeral ceremonies. Yeah, it's a lovely thing to do. I still really enjoy it. I've been working as a trainer for several years now, and seeing the deliveries and the ceremonies that people come up with and making those new connections with the trainees, it's a lovely thing to do.
Is there any grief counseling involved in training?
Not grief counselling as such, no, but we do have a session on training on understanding bereavement. I suppose is probably the thing that falls under that category. Well, a much more specialised skill. So although we do sometimes have people that come to the training that do already possess that skill, and they may be able to share pointers and advice to others that are on the course, we do try to always make sure that we are getting across that we're not here to provide training on how to do grief counselling. It's a very specific skill that would require a different type of training. I say we do help people understand the feelings that people are going through in grief and in bereavement, and perhaps how to recognise if somebody might be more vulnerable and more in need of a certain counselling, with the possibility of finding ways to perhaps gently find ways to get them any support if they need it.
And tell us how it works at the Humanist UK. So let's say I want to have a humanist funeral. Do I go online? Do I choose my celebrant? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
The most common way that it works is that humanist celebrants will be developing relationships with local funeral directors. So most of the time, families, once somebody has died, they will get, their first port of call will be to a local funeral director. And the funeral director will say to them, what kind of ceremony do you want? And if they say that the person was not religious, then they may say, well, have you considered a humanist ceremony? And they may have a list of celebrants who are local to them. So I would be on a local list for the funeral directors around my area. That is probably the most common way. But another alternative is that some people are looking us up on the Humanist UK website and selecting us directly. So people may go on to just type into Google, find a humanist funeral celebrant, and it takes you to a link. You type in your address and it shows you who are the people most local to you. And then they can look through our profiles. They can look at one person and think, no, I think I prefer this one. What they've said about themselves sounds more in keeping with what we feel would be right for our loved one, whoever that might be. So yes, so there is the opportunity for people to select them themselves. And I think also if they do take that other route, the first route that I mentioned with funeral directors, the funeral director will suggest somebody to them that they've worked with before, and they'll be able to give a recommendation depending on what they've seen. They will probably give 2 or 3 names as well. The families can look and make a decision there too.
The celebrants are generally relatively local to the service, or have you, like, what's the furthest that you've traveled for a celebration?
For a funeral celebration, the furthest I've travelled is to London. So I'm based in Leamington Spa, which is in Warwickshire in the Midlands. I realised speaking to somebody in America that Britain is a small country, but it's a small but densely packed country. Travelling to London is only about 100 miles, which may not seem very much to somebody stateside, but that would be quite a long way to go for us. And I've done one that distance. The vast majority are within a fairly small radius, and I've done the odd 1 or 2 that are midway, maybe 30, 40 miles as well.
Okay. And how often is it that the person who is the celebration is for, in other words, the person who ends up dying, is the person who chooses you versus the family?
It's quite common that the person that has died has made a special request that they want a humanist ceremony. That's quite common. It's also somewhat common that they may have left a note to their family that they've said, well, I saw a ceremony that was delivered by this person. His name was Blake Hutchings, and I'd like him to do my ceremony, and then they would pass it on. I often get, at the end of a funeral ceremony, people walking out and asking for a card so that they can contact me when the time comes for them. Sometimes they even say directly, I'd like you to do my funeral, which is a lovely thing to say, but of course you want to respond with, well, hopefully not for a long time yet, but yes, thank you, do keep me in mind, that would be a privilege. In terms of speaking to somebody directly, that does happen occasionally too. So I've had some funerals, maybe 4 or 5, where a person who may be terminally ill towards the end of their life has been in contact and said that they would like to meet with me and with their family, and I would sit with them and have a long chat with them and write up the content for a ceremony for them. And then a few weeks to a few months later, they would then get in contact and say, yes, now our family member has died and we'd like you to go ahead and do the ceremony. So that happens occasionally. I would say not very often, but occasionally.
Take us through the process, whether it's these occasional instances where the person is terminally ill and they've chosen you and you've met with them and their family, or it's after the loved one has died and you're meeting with the family. Take us through that process of meeting with the person and or the loved one's family through the celebration.
Okay, so the process, it typically goes, as I say, most commonly you get the first contact from the funeral director, who then contacts you. I then contact the family to arrange to meet with them in person. a few days later, we'll then go to visit with them. We usually sit and have a long chat, could be of the order of 1 to 2 hours, just talking about the person that's died. And I'll sit and make lots of notes. I then go away, write it all up into a ceremony script, which I then send back to the family. The family then have an opportunity to read through everything. And of course, there may be some bits in there that they wanted to tell me simply for context, for understanding, that they may not necessarily want to have included in the ceremony. And that's why it's so important that we always send it back to them together. They get an opportunity to just read through it. Sometimes they will take out a line here or add in a line there, just to tailor it slightly to what it is that they want. Invariably, the response is very positive. They come back to me saying, this is really lovely ceremony. We've got 1 or 2 tweaks to make here and there. Essentially, it's good and we'd like to go ahead with it. There is a slight back and forth for us to make those final changes and those final tweaks. And then on the day, we turn up for the ceremony and I will deliver the ceremony as agreed. And then after the ceremony, I always give the family a presentation copy of the script of the ceremony, so they've got a nicely presented keepsake to remind them of what was said during that ceremony, which they can also then share with family members, friends, perhaps people that would have liked to attend but couldn't, and then they're able to feel like they were in some way a part of it.
How long is the ceremony? Or I'm sure it varies some, but can you just give us a little bit of an idea of a typical ceremony, and not just what you are preparing and sharing, but also like other people, friends and family?
So a typical ceremony, I would say, is of the order of about 30 minutes long.
Okay.
And I would say about a little over half of the ceremonies, maybe 2/3 of the ceremonies, would have a family member or friend getting up to speak. And then you may have others that may have 2, 3, even 4 speakers, people getting up to speak and say something as part of the ceremony. There are quite a few where the family just simply don't feel comfortable with getting up to speak, and so they ask me to do it all, essentially. So I'm the person that's speaking right from the beginning, right to the end. It's broken up usually with music or poetry, things like that, to give it a sense of structure and a sense of flow. But yes, that's the typical sort of time frame and structure. There are also, becoming slightly more popular now, celebration of life ceremonies, which are slightly different. They're usually held a little bit later. It's not held at a traditional venue such as a crematorium or a burial ground, but instead would be held at somewhere like a village hall or a community centre, or even just a pub back room where family can get together. And for those ceremonies like that, the time frame is much more relaxed. It can go on for much longer. You may have several speakers. You also then have the opportunity for people to speak just impromptu and just get up to say a few words if they feel like it, because there's less sort of constraints there.
And I was thinking about this when you're talking about the 1 to 2 hours that you spend with the family and or the person who is terminally ill. And then you kind of come back to your house and you draft the ceremony. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing that they take very different shades. Like some people are very funny and the humor was a big part of their lives. Some people were very serious, and I am wondering how much of that you take into account in your drafting of the ceremony, because I've been to funerals where people are laughing. You know, mm-hmm. Whoever's leading the ceremony is telling stories and everybody's laughing. And then I've also been to funerals where that nobody is laughing. It doesn't happen at all. So I'm just wondering, I think a big part of what you're doing is you're really capturing the essence of the person who has died. And we're all so different. So I'm wondering how different your ceremonies are.
There is quite a range. Yeah, absolutely. There is a range. And it does depend very much on the person. They do tend more towards the lighter, more positive side of things. I think that a big feature of a humanist ceremony is telling the person's story. So in that meeting that we have with people, the chronology of their life, the things that they did, their achievements, where they grew up, their childhood, right the way through to their adult life, the key relationships that they had, their occupations, hobbies, interests, through to retirement. Most of the time, of course, most people are of that the later stage of their life, when we have later stage of a human life, I should say, by the time that they get to the end of their life. And when I'm in that meeting with the families, people often say to me, don't you find the job depressing? Is it not really sad? And I always say to people, it's really not. It's not depressing at all. It's very life affirming, very positive. When I go to meet families and I talk to them about their loved one, we focus on the love element of it, and we focus on what was it about them, the person, that you loved. And when you start asking those questions and they tell the stories, then they focus on things like what made that person, what was wonderful about them, but also some of the sweet little things that were endearing about them that might just naturally make you laugh because they did something a little bit quirky which people found endearing. They may have had strange little idiosyncratic traits or foibles that would be very unique to them. And then when you recount those in a ceremony, you get laughter of recognition, which is a lovely feeling. I don't go up there thinking, this is my opportunity for a stand-up act to have people laughing all the way through. But I do go in there thinking that if I get laughter of people feeling a sense of familiarity, a sense of comfort, and a sense of connection to that person again, then yeah, I feel like I've done my job in a very positive way, and I don't see it as depressing at all. As I see it very positive and very rewarding.
And that brings me to another question, which is, in your opinion, are these ceremonies for the person who has died or the people who are left behind?
I feel that they are primarily for the people that are left behind. However, in order for people to feel that sense of this was right, in order for them to go away feeling that they were happy with it and that it did the person justice, then you do need to stay true to the person and to the individual. So there's very much a case of honouring the deceased, honouring the dead, and doing our best to honour and respect their wishes and their feelings and their character. And if they left behind any specific requests for their ceremony, then we do everything we can to try to accommodate that and to put it in there. That said, the family are ultimately the client. For me, from a professional perspective, they are the client, but from a humanistic perspective as well, they are the people who are going to be ongoing, and they're going to carry the legacy of this person's memory. So doing the person justice does a service to the people that are left behind.
Tell us a little bit about how many celebrations, and I'm talking about funeral celebrations because I know you also do weddings and baby namings as an organization, and you personally also do that. Although my understanding is the vast majority, about 3/4 of what you do, is for funerals. I'm not sure if that's true generally for the Humanist UK or just for you. So maybe explain that to us, and then try to give us a sense of how many celebrations Humanist UK does in a year and how that compares to other kinds of services, specifically religious services, to the extent that you have some sense of that.
Yeah, that's a tricky question because my personal take on that is that this is probably the kind of thing that you want to be asking to, say, the director of ceremonies at Humanist UK or the Celebrant Network manager. They would have a better grasp of that. They are popular and gaining in popularity, and at the same time, religious ceremonies are on the decline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, to speak about weddings just for a moment, I know that
Yes.
humanist weddings in... So we have different laws in different parts of the country. So across the UK, in England and Wales, Humanist wedding ceremonies are purely symbolic. They don't have any legal standing, so people can't have a legal humanist wedding and then be legally married. In Scotland and in Northern Ireland, of course both also part of the UK, they do have legal status, and they have become the most popular providers of weddings. In Scotland, certainly. I think in Northern Ireland it's heading in that direction. Northern Ireland came along a little bit later. Scotland have been having legal humanist ceremonies for quite a while now, and yes, they've grown in hugely. We do know that marriage law is due to be changed at some point in the, we hope, near future in England and Wales, and the hope is there that then more people will be able to have a legally binding humanist wedding too.
Okay. And the Humanist organization, does that exist globally and it's run country by country, or can you talk a little bit about that?
So there is, I think there's an organisation called Humanists International, which connects all of the humanist organisations in different countries around the world. I'm not sure exactly how that is all tied together, but Humanists UK is a standalone organisation, a charity within the UK that just has connections and good, strong working relationships with other humanist organisations around the world. I'm not sure exactly how they are connected together.
And do you know how long the Humanist UK has been around?
Yep, so I think it's just coming up to its 130th year. So it's been going for, yeah. It changed its name about 8 or 9 years ago, and it became Humanists UK. Before that, it was the British Humanist Association. And that started, like I say, about 130 years ago. And it started out, its primary purpose at the time was to provide non-religious ceremonies for people, particularly funerals in the early days, and then developed into other ceremonies, and has grown into a charity that also now seeks to represent humanists and people without religion for things like political campaigns, to try to support secular interests and to try to make a fairer world and a fairer law system based on trying to eliminate discrimination by religious belief.
Interesting. Okay. How is your preparation for a humanist funeral different than it would be for a wedding or a baby naming ceremony? Or is it similar?
The basic process is quite similar. You have the contact, the meeting, the writing of the ceremony, the back and forth, the delivery of the ceremony, and then the wrapping up afterwards, the tying up of the loose ends afterwards. The big difference is typically the timescale that you're working on. So for a funeral, you'll be getting a contact with the family, and you need to have it done much more quickly. For weddings, people may be contacting you a year, sometimes up to 2, or sometimes over 2 years before the date of their ceremony. It can be quite difficult because one of the things that you have to do there is you're not constantly in contact with the people that you're working with and that you're working for. And so sometimes having to go back and sort of refresh your memory, make sure that you're familiar with all of the information that you've gathered and that you feel comfortable with that and know what you're doing with that, can be more challenging, an extra level of work that's involved. I say the basic process is roughly the same. Another key difference, I think, is that for funerals, quite typically they tend to follow a more common pattern and structure, whereas with naming ceremonies or weddings, there's much more input from the families and the couples that you're working with to make it much more unique, different, bespoke. You may never do 2 ceremonies that run in a same way. And I guess part of that is because people are, when they decide to get married and they start thinking about their wedding, they start to create a picture in their head and they are thinking, well, this is how we want it to be, and everybody's got their own views on that. With funeral ceremonies, often it's a bit of a shock. People aren't necessarily in the headspace that they want to be throwing the rule book out the window, but they want some guidance and support by somebody that is more experienced, is happy to lead them through it. So that's also another big difference. There's much more guidance and support coming from us for funerals, whereas for weddings, it's more we can help you create your vision.
Right. Okay. Now, coming back to funerals, we talked before about how you really try not to talk about concepts of like the afterlife or what happens after death. Tell us a little bit about how do you leave things with people? So obviously you're very focused on the person who's died and telling the story of their life, both what they accomplished and sort of, I love this, like their quirks and like getting, the real them and honoring the real them. How do you sort of close a ceremony? How is there a sense of closure at the end when you're not talking about what happens after death?
Yeah, so there is a section towards the end of a ceremony that we call the committal, which is essentially an opportunity for a final goodbye. And in a burial ceremony, that is typically at the part of the country where I live, it's common to have the committal part in a burial ceremony as the coffin is being lowered. So the coffin's lowered into the ground, and it's an opportunity for people to say a collective goodbye. And in that sense, it brings that sort of sense of closure. Of course, the moment when somebody dies is beyond the control of us. We can't choose when we lose somebody. That is completely beyond our control and it's taken from us. Having that opportunity at a later time to gather together and say, okay, now we're saying goodbye, gives people a bit more of an opportunity to mentally prepare, to mentally feel that, okay, we've had the opportunity to say goodbye on our terms. At a crematorium ceremony, it's becoming far more common now for curtains around the coffin to remain open, and then that way, as people leave the ceremony, they quite often will then approach the coffin and say a personal, private, quiet goodbye before leaving. That's quite a common thing too. I guess how they get that sense of closure, I suppose.
So you talked about sort of a collective goodbye at a graveside. Is everybody saying goodbye at the same time, or is it like they're coming one after the other? Is it a group gathering ritual, or is it more of an individual thing?
No, it's really just more of an opportunity for people to... It can be a very simple, small act, like, for example, in a cremation ceremony, just simply saying, now is the time where we've come to the committal. If you feel able, please stand. And just taking that action of standing, and then as the celebrant reads the words, saying a final goodbye on behalf of the family and friends. So people are typically not... It's not that the mourners and the people that are gathering there are actually speaking or saying that goodbye, but that typically the celebrant is the person that's doing that's actually using those words, saying goodbye to the person that's died, saying it on behalf of the people that are there, but for the mourners and the people there to have that opportunity to just do a little action of just, even if it's just as simple as standing, then there's that. It could also be at a graveside, it could be things like casting some earth into the grave, onto the coffin, and that is their physical gesture. And that's, I suppose, that ritual element that you're asking about.
And you talked earlier about how if people ask you sometimes, is this a depressing job? How has being a funeral celebrant informed your perspective on death, grief, and religion? I think from an early age probably was less, something that you didn't connect with. But I'm just interested in how this work has altered your thinking about any of these things.
It certainly does make me think a little bit more about when I will lose my own loved ones, family members. It makes me think about how my loved ones will feel when I've gone. Yeah, I guess the sense of making sure that when I go, that I've left behind the positive memories that people are going to then remember and are then going to carry forward with them. Because I think for me, not believing in an afterlife where we may be reunited in that sense, my hope is that the legacy that I leave behind in terms of memories and connection and life lessons, I suppose, for people like my children, and that they feel supported and safe and ready to face the world in their own way. I get it does bring those thoughts to mind when somebody has died that is of a similar age to myself or has children of a similar age to my own. It certainly brings those thoughts to mind. And similarly, if it's somebody that reminds me of one of my parents, who I'm very happy to say are both still with us, then again it makes me think about wanting to make sure that I make the most of my time with them. And just before coming on this, I've been round to visit my parents earlier this afternoon, which was lovely to do.
It's basically a reminder to live every day the life that you want to be remembered for living.
And staying true to your values and making sure that the impact that you're leaving is a positive one. Sure.
I love that. I do an annual series that has some relation to death and dying. And the primary reason is that I think we don't generally think or talk about death enough, even though it is the most inevitable thing in our lives. And what I feel is very similar to what you just said, which is that when we do confront it and talk about it and think about it, we're actually just living more fully now. So it's really not about death. It's really more about life and how to really make the most of this life. It's not a morbid thing. It's just a reality of our lives, and I think can help us to make the most of our lives and also to have more peace when our loved ones die, or even planning for our own inevitable death. So it's really interesting that that's sort of the impact that it's had on you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really highlighted the strength of feeling of love, essentially. Not to minimize the sense, of course, the sense of grief, the sense of loss that people are experiencing can be incredibly sad and all-consuming and deep, and it can be the kind of thing that people will feel for the rest of their lives. However, the other side of that is that the reason they're feeling that is often because of how loved that person was. And so to be able to be going in to meet with this family, meet with these people and say, tell me all about this person, tell me the best things that you remember with them. I've had meetings with families where at the end of them people have said to me, it's the first time I've laughed since they died. It's the first time I've smiled, and it's been lovely to focus on all the positive and all the happy memories. And yeah, I think it does help. I think and I'm humbled to be able to take on that role.
You shared earlier that sometimes at the end of a celebration, people will ask for a card or how to get in touch with you. Can you give us a little bit more about some specific feedback that you've received about a celebration that really made you feel good about the work that you did and the honoring the person who died?
Yeah, so I do often get people coming up to me after the ceremony who say to me that they are religious or that they're not humanist, but that they loved the ceremony and that they thought it was really good. And I think that makes me feel that I've measured it just right, because as I said earlier on, my key is to make sure that everybody in there is acknowledged for their humanity and is brought in and included because of that humanity that we share, not about what we believe. And it's not about putting my beliefs out there or the beliefs of Humanists UK. It's just simply about making sure that we're focusing on the commonalities between us all. So I am proud that I get people coming up to me that say that they're not humanist, but that they enjoyed the ceremony and that it was very fitting. I've had ceremonies where people come to me and ask whether I knew the person. And I say, no, I never did. And they say, because it felt as though you did. It felt as though you knew them really well. And it's always down to the fact that the families that I deal with are so willing to tell me all about this person and to create this tribute that captures their character. I always say, I hope it did them justice. And they say, yes, it did. And hearing that is a lovely thing.
Have you ever had a particularly surprising or unconventional request for a ceremony?
Now, I thought about this because I thought about whether this might come up. Okay, so there was one ceremony that I did where it was a person who I had met before. They contacted me. This person was in a hospice. He didn't have very long to live. And so I was able to sit and have a conversation with him. I had a chat with him and his daughter and his partner. And he was so, although of course he was approaching the end of his life, and there was a couple of moments where that reality was hitting him and he got quite emotional. For the majority of that meeting, he was bubbly, laughing, making jokes, and humor was a big thing for him, and not taking things too seriously was a big thing for him. So his final piece of music that he wanted, as the curtains closed, he wanted the music to play and the curtains to close at the end of it, and he wanted the song "Fire" by The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. I don't know if you know the song. It's a screaming voice that shouts, "I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you fire." And then it's all about going into flames, and he's got that playing as the curtains are closing. Is very visceral, but at the same time, for him, it was all about not taking himself too seriously and having a joke about it. He also had a coffin that was made to look like a parcel with a sign on the side that said "Return to Sender" attached to it. So, which just summed up his approach to things, which was very, very nice.
Well, I have 5 questions I like to ask at the end of every episode, but before I get there, I wanted to pause and see if there's anything that I should have asked that I didn't, or that you would really like people to know about a humanist funeral celebration, your work, anything at all.
I guess the only thing to say about when you put that to me is that we emphasize that what we do are humanist ceremonies. It's not that we only provide ceremonies for humanist people. The person that's died can be from any background, have any belief, as long as the ceremony itself is humanist in nature and is inclusive and is focusing on uncontroversial shared beliefs, such as the fact that we are all human and that we will die, and that people who are left behind will feel a sense of loss and grief, which I think is quite universal. Then we can do these ceremonies for anybody.
Here are my last 5 questions. So the first one is, as we explore in my brand, Amatand, which stands for to take care of your soul, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to enjoy the present, or even take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
You may be able to tell from what's just hanging on the wall over my shoulder just behind me, which is my guitar that's hanging on the wall over my shoulder. Yeah, I first picked up guitar at the age of 7, and as I said earlier, it is now a connection to my past, to my present, to my future. It feels like it's a core part of my identity. I told the story a little while back to some other friends of mine. Last year, I went on a family holiday with my wife and her family, including her 2 sisters and my nieces and nephews. So there were 6 children, my 2 children plus my 4 nieces and nephews. And they decided they were going to put on a show for all the family. They created little place cards for people to sit down so you had your seat. For everybody, they'd put little pictures and diagrams, and for me, they'd put my name and guitar and music things all around it. So it's, yeah, to know that that is seen as a core part of my identity to the next generation, I suppose. I mean, it was, my parents quickly saw me as musical as I was a child. My contemporaries know me from performing, and now my children and my nieces and nephews all associate that with me. So yeah, my guitar.
Amazing. Can you share a favorite tradition? It could be something from when you were a child, something you do with your children, anything at all.
At the end of each day, when we sit down for dinner with my wife and my two children, we go around the table and ask for each other's highlight of the day. It's an opportunity for us to bring us back to the present and to share what's going on in our lives with each other. And we've been doing that for a few years now, and we try to do it. We try to do it every day when we remember. I'd say we do it about 90% of the time. But yeah, that's something that I intend to keep going, and I hope that when they have kids of their own, that's something that they will carry on doing with them too.
Yeah, I've heard that tradition. It's a beautiful one. And I think your children are probably a bit younger than mine. Mine are teenagers now. And I think it gets a little trickier as they get older. So
Yeah.
I will hope you will be able to keep that going with them.
I'll cling on to it.
Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
Yes, so just before we had children, my wife and I would frequently like to have people around, particularly at Christmas. We had this every Christmas. We did it for 10 years, where we had a gathering of friends that would come round, and it was almost sort of the highlight of our year. We would love having this gathering, and it grew over the years. So it started off the first year. It was actually, my wife started it off before we got together a year or two later, and it was just 3 or 4 friends that was just impromptu, and they did it again the next year, and then the next year I was on the scene, and we did it, and it just grew and grew and grew. We stopped that when it was starting to get a little bit hard to manage with the children and with friends moving on to another stages of their lives. But now that the kids are a little bit older and it's more fun to get them properly involved, yeah, we love to have our friends round, and we have a particular couple that we're close with that have children similar ages to our own that come around quite frequently, and yeah, we love to have them round and to host. So that's something that we really enjoy.
Good. Do you have 1 or 2 top resources, books or websites, podcasts, anything to recommend? It doesn't have to be related to humanist celebrations. It could literally just be like a couple of your favorites. We have a lot of readers who listen and love to give book recommendations as well.
There's a couple of podcasts that I listen to that have become a strong element of my life, really. There's one called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is a focus on science and critical thinking. I love that.
And my last question is, what do you do for yourself? I mean, your music is probably a part of this, but do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or daily routine that contributes to your success or well-being?
Yeah, so I don't really have any strict routines that stand out to me. I think one thing that I do that I used to do a lot, I fell out of the habit of doing it, and I've tried to kickstart again, is to go for a run regularly. I used to do that quite a bit. I found that it was really a really positive experience to get that exercise. I stopped doing it for quite a while, but I've tried to get back into it over the last few weeks, and yeah, I feel that it really does help me with my mental well-being and my physical well-being, just to get that regular exercise. So running when I can.
That's great. I mean, movement is such a key part of our overall wellness. And so usually these responses are around some sort of movement, whether it's yoga or running or whatever it is, or some sort of meditation or breath work or journaling. And it's funny, people have very different routines. Some are first thing in the morning, have to get up before the rest of the household is up and have my quiet time. For some people, it's in the evening. So I think it's just helpful for people to hear the different things that are helping people sort of stay focused and centered and well.
I think I have thought of one, actually, which is something that I do every single day, which is I am always the first up in the house. Immediately head straight downstairs, and I make my wife a morning cup of tea and myself a cup of coffee and drinks for the kids as well. My alarm goes off, they stay in bed, I go downstairs, get the drinks and bring it to them. My wife certainly appreciates it, I know that. But I enjoy it too. It feels like something that I'm just being able to just do for my family to start the day off right. It's a small act, but it's the first thing that I do in my day, every single day, is to do something, to give something to my family.
Yeah, well, service is a huge piece of feeling purpose. So that's such a beautiful thing. And I think that's a beautiful place to end. So thank you so much, Blake, for joining me. It's been wonderful talking with you, learning about the Humanist UK and the Humanist celebrations. And I know people will have learned a lot and suspect that they will be looking it up and learning more about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at amatendre.com or on Instagram at Amatond. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatond website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatond and Amatond's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatond.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.